May 11th, 1945. A narrow, mud-choked road outside Garmisch-Partenkirchen, Bavaria. The air, thin and sharp with the scent of pine and melting snow, carries a stillness that feels wrong. For years, this soundscape had been defined by the drone of aircraft, the distant crump of artillery, the grinding complaint of tank treads. Now, only the wind whispers through the towering firs of the Bavarian Alps. The war in Europe is over. It has been for 3 days. But here, in the rubble of the Third Reich's final bastion, the silence is a coiled spring, taut with a tension that peace has not yet managed to unspool. Anneliese Schmidt, a former signals auxiliary with the Luftwaffe, keeps her eyes fixed on the cracked leather of the boots in front of her. She is 20 years old. 3 days ago, she was a soldier of Germany. Today, she is a prisoner of the Americans. Her hands are numb, not just from the cold that seeps up from the muddy road, but from a deeper, paralytic fear. Beside her, Helga Meyer, a Red Cross nurse nearly twice her age, walks with a rigid posture that defies the exhaustion etched onto her face. Helga has seen the blood-soaked fields of the Eastern Front. She has seen cities turn to charnel houses. She believes she knows how this story ends. The column of women shuffles forward, a river of weary gray and field green uniforms. There are over 200 of them: telephone operators, administrative clerks, anti-aircraft auxiliaries, nurses. They are the female cogs of a war machine that has ground to a halt, and now they are being swept up like scrap metal. Their guards are a platoon from the U.S. 101st Airborne Division, men who look as tired as they do. The Americans aren't brutal. They are businesslike, their faces grimly impassive. They carry their M1 Garands with a casual familiarity that is more unnerving than open hostility. You watch their eyes, young and old, scanning the dense tree line, and you realize their war isn't over either. The enemy is gone, but the danger has not yet received the memo. The march ends at a clearing dominated by a large, dilapidated farmhouse and several outbuildings. Its stone walls are streaked with grime, and a few windows are boarded over with splintered planks. Barbed wire, freshly strung between hastily pounded posts, glitters with cold moisture. It isn't a camp, it's a holding pen. A young American captain, his helmet liner pushed back on his forehead, stands near the gate. Captain John Miller of the 327th Glider Infantry Regiment. He looks at the column of women not with triumph, but with an air of profound weariness. He has another problem to manage, another logistical nightmare in a continent full of them. He speaks to a master sergeant at his side, a thick-necked man named Kowalski, whose knuckles are scarred and permanently dirty. Their words are too low to be understood, a murmur of English lost in the vast, indifferent landscape. The gate, a simple barbed wire contraption, is pulled open. The guards gesture with their rifles. "Rein," one of them says, using one of the few German words he knows. "Get in." The command is flat, devoid of emotion. It is the sound of processing. As Anneliese steps over the threshold, her foot sinks into mud that smells of wet earth and livestock. She stumbles, and for a terrifying second, she thinks she will fall. A hand steadies her. It's Helga. The older woman's grip is surprisingly strong, her eyes conveying a silent, bitter warning. Do not show weakness. Not here, not now. They are herded toward the main barn. Its huge wooden doors hang open, revealing a cavernous interior filled with straw that is probably damp and crawling with vermin. This will be their home. As the last of the women are pushed inside, the doors begin to scrape shut, plunging the space into a dim, dusty twilight. The heavy wooden bar drops into its iron brackets on the outside. The sound is a final, deafening boom. It is the sound of a key turning in a lock the size of a nation. The silence that follows is thick with the breathing of 200 captive women, and the unspoken question that hangs in the cold, stale air: what happens now? The days bleed into one another, marked not by the sun, which struggles to pierce the heavy Bavarian cloud cover, but by the meager routines of captivity. The world shrinks to the confines of the barbed wire fence, to the damp straw of the barn and the muddy yard that separates it from the farmhouse where the Americans have established their command post. A routine forms, a fragile skeleton of order in the body of chaos. Each morning, the barn doors are unbarred, and the women are let out into the exercise yard. Each day, they are given 2 meals, if you could call them that. The first is a thin, watery soup, served from large galvanized steel cans. It is lukewarm and tastes of boiled cabbage and little else. The second is a thick slice of dense, dark bread, the kind of Kriegsbrot they had become accustomed to in the war's final, desperate years. It is often stale, sometimes tinged with mold at the edges, which they carefully cut away. It is not enough. It is never enough. The gnawing emptiness in their stomachs becomes a constant companion, a dull ache that sharpens into a piercing cramp in the cold, sleepless nights. They watch the American guards eat from their own sea ration tins, smelling the faint, impossibly rich aroma of processed meat and coffee. The GIs do not mock them with their food. They eat quietly, almost guiltily, turning away from the wire as if ashamed of their relative bounty. Captain Miller knows his situation is untenable. Supply lines, prioritized for the millions of displaced persons and Allied prisoners being liberated across Germany, are stretched to the breaking point. His company is at the end of a very long chain, and the trucks that are supposed to arrive with rations are perpetually delayed, rerouted, or lost entirely. He radios his battalion headquarters daily. The response is always the same. Sit tight, Captain. Do what you can. Supplies are en route. But en route is an abstraction. The hunger in the barn is real. He sees it in the prisoners' hollowed-out eyes, in the way their movements become slower, more deliberate, conserving every calorie. Among the prisoners, fear begins to curdle into a dark, corrosive suspicion. Whispers spread through the straw like a contagion in the dead of night. Helga Meyer, the stoic nurse, becomes an unwilling repository for these fears. "They are starving us deliberately," a young clerk from Berlin murmurs, her voice trembling. It is revenge. Helga tries to dismiss it. "The Americans are not the Russians," she says, her voice low and firm. "They have rules." But even she remembers the stories her patients told, whispers of what happened to German nurses captured by Soviet troops. The propaganda of Goebbels rings in their ears, vivid tales of Allied atrocities that now seem horribly plausible. They are women, alone and defenseless, the property of their conquerors. Annalise watches the guards, studying their faces for any sign of malice. She sees none. She sees only exhaustion, the same bone-deep weariness she feels in herself. She sees boys from places she cannot imagine, Ohio, Texas, California, who look as lost as she feels. Yet the fear remains. Every gesture, every shouted command in English, every time a guard chambers a round in his rifle, sends a fresh spike of adrenaline through her. One afternoon, a young woman in her barracks row collapses while walking across the yard. She does not faint from fear, but from simple, uncomplicated starvation. As Helga and 2 other nurses rush to her side, a terrifying thought takes root in the collective mind of the prisoners. If the food runs out completely, what will the Americans do with them? They are a liability, a drain on resources, and in war, liabilities are often eliminated. That evening, the soup is thinner than ever before. There is no bread. Master Sergeant Kowalski himself oversees the distribution, his face a granite mask of frustration. He ladles out the last of it, scraping the bottom of the can. The sound echoes across the silent, hungry yard. It sounds like a death knell. The rain begins on the 5th day. It is not a gentle spring shower, but a cold, relentless downpour that turns the camp's muddy yard into a soupy quagmire. The temperature plummets. The women huddle inside the barn, the dampness seeping into their bones, chilling them more than the cold itself. The roof leaks in a dozen places, and the steady drip, drip, drip of icy water onto the straw is a maddening torture. Hunger is no longer a dull ache. It is a sharp, predatory thing, clawing at their insides. The last of the bread is gone. The last of the cabbage soup is a memory. For 24 hours, they have eaten nothing. Inside the farmhouse, Captain Miller stares at a map of the surrounding region, his jaw tight. The rain streaks down the dirty window pane, blurring the formidable peaks of the Alps into gray smudges. He has made his 10th call to headquarters. The supply convoy, he was told, is bogged down by a washed-out bridge 20 miles away. It could be 2 more days, maybe 3. He looks at Sergeant Kowalski, who is cleaning his M1 rifle with slow, deliberate strokes. 212 prisoners, Sergeant, Miller says, his voice quiet, and 34 of my own men. We're out of everything but coffee and cigarettes. Kowalski doesn't look up from his work. I saw another one of them faint this morning, sir. The nurse, the older one, she's holding them together, but they're at their limit. We are too. He slides the bolt back and forth. The metallic sound is crisp and final. We can't just let them starve, Captain. The unspoken alternative hangs in the air between them. They could march the women to the next collection point, 10 miles down the road, but in their weakened state, many wouldn't make it. They could release them, but his orders are clear. Hold all captured personnel until they can be processed by military intelligence. Miller walks to the window and looks out at the barn. It is a silent, hulking shape in the downpour. He is 24 years old, a former history teacher from Dayton, Ohio. Nothing in his training prepared him for this. Not the chaos of the Normandy drop, not the frozen hell of Bastogne. This is a different kind of war, a silent battle against logistics and human misery. He thinks of the deer he has seen in the forests on their patrols, ghosting through the thick stands of pine. An idea, born of desperation, begins to form. It is against regulations. Discharging a weapon without enemy contact is a serious offense. Using military equipment for anything other than military purposes is forbidden. But the regulations were written for a world with supply lines, for a war that made sense. This world does not. Kowalski, Miller says, turning from the window, get Corporal Jensen and Private O'Malley. Tell them to bring their rifles. Full clips. The sergeant finally looks up, his eyes narrowing slightly. He understands immediately. Jensen is a farm boy from Iowa who can track anything that moves. O'Malley, from Montana, boasts he can hit a bottle cap at 200 yards. Kowalski nods slowly. And us there? Miller picks up his own M1 Garand from where it leans against the wall. We are going with them. In the barn, the women hear the farmhouse door slam shut. A few of them, peering through cracks in the wooden walls, see the small group of American soldiers emerge. They see Captain Miller, Sergeant Kowalski, and 2 others. They are not the usual guards. They are carrying their rifles at the ready, their movements purposeful and grim. They don't form up for a patrol. Instead, they walk directly toward the dense, dark forest that borders the camp. The prisoners exchange terrified glances. What does this mean? Why is the commanding officer leading an armed party into the woods? Annalise feels a cold dread snake up her spine. Helga watches, her face pale, her lips pressed into a thin, hard line. She has seen this before, on the road to Stalingrad. Small groups of soldiers marching prisoners into the woods. The prisoners never came back. The silence in the barn becomes absolute, a suffocating blanket of fear. Then, from deep within the forest, comes the sharp, flat crack of a rifle shot. The sound slices through the air like a whip. It is not the distant, rolling thunder of artillery they had grown used to. It is close, intimate, violent. For a heartbeat, there is only stunned silence in the barn. Then, a single, high-pitched scream shatters it, and the dam of restrained terror breaks. Panic erupts. Women cry out, clutching at each other in the gloom. Some scramble back from the walls, as if physical distance could offer some protection from the sound. Others begin to pray, their words a frantic, overlapping babble of Hail Marys and Our Fathers. Annalise is frozen where she stands, her back pressed against the rough, splintered wood of the barn wall. Her breath catches in her throat. Her mind, starved and terrified, leaps to the only conclusion it can: an execution. They are starting. They are taking them out in small groups into the woods to be shot. The stories, the rumors, the darkest fears, they were all true. She squeezes her eyes shut, seeing a flash of a shallow grave in the dark earth of the forest floor. She waits for the next shot, for the volley that will signal a mass killing. Beside her, Helga grabs her arm. The nurse's face is ashen, but her eyes are clear, focused. "Get down," she hisses, her voice a low command. "Stay away from the doors." She pulls Annalise with her, pushing through the terrified crowd toward the back of the barn. Helga has seen death, has smelled it, has held it in her hands. She recognizes its prelude. She is not panicking. She is preparing. She scans the terrified faces around her, her mind racing. Who will be next? Will they call out names? Or will they simply open the doors and drag them out at random? Crack. A second shot rings out. It sounds further away than the first, more muffled by the thick canopy of trees and the persistent drumming of the rain. The new wave of hysteria it causes is shorter, sharper. A profound and terrifying confusion begins to seep through the panic. The pattern is wrong. Executions are methodical. A volley, silence, another volley, or a single shot followed by another and another in quick, brutal succession. This is different. The shots are sporadic, separated by long, agonizing minutes of silence. They sound random. You are there, in the cold, damp straw. You can feel the trembling of the young woman pressed against your back. You can smell the fear, a sour, metallic scent that mingles with the odors of wet wool and unwashed bodies. You listen, every nerve ending screaming, straining to interpret the sounds from the forest. Crack ping. A third shot. The faint ping is the sound of an M1 Garand ejecting its empty cartridge clip, a detail only a soldier would notice. But it's the timing that is so deeply unsettling. Why the delay? What are they doing out there? The mind conjures a dozen terrible possibilities, each more grotesque than the last. The waiting is a unique form of torture. It is a slow, methodical dismantling of hope. An hour passes, or maybe it is a lifetime. The rain lessens to a miserable drizzle. The shooting has stopped. The silence that returns is heavier now, freighted with dread. The women in the barn are exhausted, their panic burned down to a smoldering ember of anxiety. They huddle in small groups, whispering, watching the tree line through the cracks in the wall. Then they see movement. 4 figures emerge from the forest, dark silhouettes against the gray, failing light. It is the captain and his men. They are walking slowly, heavily, as if carrying the great weight. As they draw closer to the camp's perimeter, the women see that they are. They are not marching with the grim finality of executioners. Their faces are streaked with mud and rain, but they look satisfied, not sinister. And draped across the shoulders of Sergeant Kowalski and Corporal Jensen are 2 large, limp forms, their dark hides matted and wet, their elegant heads lolling with the motion of the soldier's stride. They are not carrying bodies. They are carrying deer. The 4 American soldiers do not stop at the farmhouse. They walk directly to the barbed wire gate of the women's enclosure and unlatch it. The metallic clank of the gate opening sends a new shiver of fear through the barn, a final reflexive tremor before the confusion takes over completely. Captain Miller, his uniform soaked, steps just inside the yard. Sergeant Kowalski and the other 2 men follow, laying their burdens down in the mud with a soft, heavy thud. 2 red deer. Their dark eyes are glassy and vacant. A trickle of blood runs from a neat hole in the neck of the larger one, staining the wet ground a deeper shade of brown. The women in the barn stare, their minds struggling to process the scene. The gunshots, the soldiers in the woods, the long, terrifying wait, and now this. The pieces don't fit the narrative of an execution. They form a different picture entirely. One so unexpected, so contrary to their deepest fears, that it takes a long moment to fully comprehend. The smell of the hunt reaches them. Damp fur, fresh blood, the musky scent of wild animals. It is a primal smell, a smell of sustenance. Captain Miller walks toward the barn. He stops about 20 feet from the door, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. He doesn't have a translator with him. He searches for the words, his high school German rusty and inadequate. Wir haben Essen, he says, pointing from his men to the deer. Für Sie, we have food. For you. The words are simple, spoken with the awkward accent of a foreigner, but their meaning is monumental. A slow murmur spreads through the barn. Anneliese feels the iron grip of fear in her chest finally begin to loosen. She looks at Helga, whose face is a mask of disbelief. The gunshots were not for them. The soldiers were not executioners. They were hunters. The entire terrifying ordeal that had played out in their minds was a phantom, a ghost conjured by hunger and the trauma of war. The Americans hadn't been planning to kill them. They had been breaking regulations, risking court-martial to feed them. The moment is surreal. For a long, silent minute, the two groups, captors and captives, simply stare at each other across the muddy yard. The war has drawn a line between them, a line of politics, nationality, and violence. But a more fundamental reality has just erased it: hunger. Slowly, hesitantly, a few of the women begin to emerge from the barn. Helga is among the first. She walks toward the deer, her steps sure and steady. She is a nurse. She knows anatomy. She kneels in the mud, her hands examining the animals with a professional, practiced air. She looks up at Captain Miller. Wir brauchen Messer, she says. We need knives. What happens next is something that could only occur in the strange, dislocated world of a war's aftermath. Sergeant Kowalski produces two large combat knives. He hands them, handles first, to Helga. Other women come forward, those who grew up on farms, who know how to butcher an animal. American soldiers, the same men who had guarded them with rifles, now bring forth a large iron pot and work to build a fire in the pouring rain, using gasoline from a jerry can to coax the wet wood to life. The invisible barrier between them dissolves, replaced by a shared, urgent purpose. German and American hands work together, dressing the deer, cutting the meat, filling the pot with water from a rain barrel. The air, once thick with terror, begins to fill with the smell of wood smoke and roasting venison. It is the smell of survival. As darkness falls, they eat together, not as prisoners and guards, but as human beings huddled around a fire, sharing the first hot meal any of them have had in days. The war is over, but here, in this muddy clearing in the Bavarian Alps, a different kind of peace treaty has just been signed, one written not in ink, but in an act of profound, unexpected, and life-saving decency.